Hello, today's review is for a slightly different type of book, An Artist of the Floating World by Kazuo Ishiguro. I've got this rather nice edition. It's a newer edition. The introduction is from 2016 and I was really in the mood for some nice writing and I expected this to be exactly what this book was, and I was quite correct. The writing is full of elegant prose, and it completely sweeps you away in the beauty and the delicacy of the writing and the subtlety with which the story is built up through the main character and his life. So this book, as I said, came out in 1986. It was first published then, but the introduction is from 2016, where the author explains how this book came to be. And the prose that you get in the introduction is actually very similar to the prose in the novel, perhaps a bit more crisp, but it was the introduction that really drew me into buying this book and reading it. So the whole Japanese world of Mr. Ono is very delicately built. Delicately, intricately, beautifully, artistically, all of those things. He is an older man in post-World War II Japan, so we're talking about 1949 to 1950, I believe. And you have got the subtlety and the depth is built up from his reminiscences of when he was a younger man, just learning his artist's trade under one of a couple of senseis. And then a bit later, as he became an influential leader of a small art group and he had his students, and it builds the politics and the society of pre-war Japan in that way, which we can compare with the post-war Japan where things are very clearly different. Mr. Ono has retired. He's living in this beautiful, largish house on his own, and the house itself was partially destroyed in one of the last bombing events of World War II. So it's this beautiful house where he apparently lives alone. At the end, at the beginning, he lives with his younger daughter who is not yet married. And the subtlety of the whole Japanese feel is beautifully built. Now, in the introduction, the author talks about how Proust inspired the writing of this book in the sense that Proust allowed for multiple timelines to be integrated. And that's what he does here. And he does it very well. Now, I don't know too much about the artist, about the author, except the little bit that I read online, and it sounds like he was born in Japan, came to England at the age of around about 5, and he had a very traditional Japanese mother who kept his interest about Japan alive and who helped build that picture. But I do feel that while feeling intensely Japanese, I think this book is very, very available to someone of a Western background who doesn't know much about Japan. It's also very, I'm going to say, attractive to someone who does know a little bit about Japan. I know the most minute amount, but small things like the formality of conversation between people and the reserve and the built-in politenesses. To someone who knows nothing about Japan, they may even be a tiny bit frustrating. There's one point particularly on page 85 when his younger daughter Setsuko, has come to visit him with his grandson, and she's raising the issue of him seeing his old friend and ex-student, Mr. Kuroda. And she's hinting and she's dancing around a something, and we as the readers, we don't really know what this is, and it induces a sense of unease. So about halfway through, we start to get the uneasy feeling that Mr. Ono was actually influential, but is now somewhat in disrepute, as his opinions about society and the future of Japan from before the war are not ones that really are in synchronization with post-war Japan. It talks about many of the older Japanese who had been part of the war effort in a few cases committing suicide or falling into disrepute. And we find that one who is old students has a beef with him, as it were, over what happened in the war. But the way in which Ishiguro builds this up is so subtle that you don't really see anything coming. And though at times I got this sense of unease from the book, it's like, what's happening? What is going to happen? What is it about? How are we going to uncover the things that are being hinted at us from all around the place? It's never really put out there. And in a sense, you don't get closure on what all these hints are about. At the end, it's like all sort of swept under the rug. Was it real? Wasn't it real? We don't know. But we do see this slow unfolding of Mr. Ono remembering when he was young, when he was first a student at a sensei's art studio and then went to another art studio. We have his conversations and memories of how he talked about other students, how his art style came to change. And at the point of the novel, which is the now, if you will, he isn't actually painting anymore. So this slow build and this uneasy suspicion that's given to the reader is quite lovely, but this is one that you need to read almost like poetry. You need to sit in there with the descriptions of things and of people and events and conversations. The small reminiscences of how the pleasure district used to look compared to its being bombed during the war and then the bombed buildings being demolished and office buildings being put up. There's this secondary storyline of his elder daughter and the marriage arrangements. So in this scenario, you have almost a pre-war way of the marriage being arranged. His daughter Setsuko was married before the war, and this was arranged in the old style, with a marriage broker contacting the two families and arranging meetups and investigating the backgrounds of the families, slowly moving to this very formal conclusion to the negotiations. His younger daughter, Noriko, was not married when the war came around, and she's now getting to be 26, so she's quite old, and she might never marry. A previous marriage brokering fell through just not too long ago, and the hints are constantly being given that Mr. Ono's involvement in political views and his disreputable company from before the war might have been part of that. So, hello, chicken. So what this book really reminded me about is World War II itself, because World War II created this huge psychic injury in many countries. Many nations were devastated physically, of course, and there were traumatic and debilitating side effects to a whole heap of people, and we know that. But I think because World War II is such a very known story, and it comes up in the European context, it comes up in the Asia-Pacific context. As an Australian, World War II has specific meanings to Australians, and there are particular sites around the Asia-Pacific that are associated with it. So we have this sort of notion of it was, of course, terrible, and we think of Hellfire Pass in Thailand, we think of Papua New Guinea and the things that happened there. We think of the stories that we've been told. And of course, if you are Japanese, the stories will be different. The stories were going to be involved in Japan's own personal defeat, which my understanding is that that created a huge psychic injury to the country itself. And I'd kind of forgotten about that. And this book has reminded me of so much about what I knew about World War II and the defeats and the cultural impact in Japan, which Japan has managed to absorb and develop into a whole new country. And I think that is the underlying story of this book, as narrated, if you will, by Mr. Ono, who lived before the war and is now living after the war. And at the end, he makes peace with this new generation and how it's changing and how everything is different. And just how different it has become and in what sort of ways are ones that we see through his eyes and through his memories of being young, and the beauties and the more slightly disagreeable things that happened along the way. So, thoroughly enjoyable book. Had a great time. Thanks for watching. Read good books, and quite possibly, I'm going to say, maybe even this very good book. Have a great day.